A Roman soldier gave the empire 25 years of his life. Marching, bleeding, building, killing. And when it was finally over, when he'd survived what should have killed him 10 times over, Rome handed him a rock, a coin, and a piece of bronze, and told him, good luck. No pension office. No therapist. No retirement party. Just a broken 45-year-old man who knew how to do exactly one thing, and it wasn't farming. Some of these men got rich. Some got citizenship for their entire bloodline. Some got land so barren it broke their shovels. And some never left the army at all. They went back. Voluntarily. Begging to fight again. This is the real story of what Rome promised its soldiers, and what it actually gave them. Stick around till the end, because the last part of this story is the one nobody talks about, and it explains something about war that's still true today. Let's go back 2,000 years.
The Romans called this by the beautiful and proud Latin term, onesta missio. In essence, it was the main bureaucratic celebration in the life of any ancient soldier. The discharge ceremony was conducted with incredible pomp and military solemnity. A special imperial decree terminating the soldier's contract was read aloud before the ranks. The soldier was handed 2 small bronze plaques, securely fastened with copper wire. This was the famous Roman military diploma, confirming all his new rights. Compared to it, a modern passport looks like nothing more than a pitiful and fragile piece of cardboard. These plaques were engraved with the entire service record of the weary veteran. They listed his name, his unit, and the name of the emperor who had granted him his long-awaited freedom. This heavy bronze object was the most valuable item in his knapsack. Without it, he was just a vagabond with a sword. With it, he was a respected man. The Romans adored strict bureaucracy long before the advent of modern government services. But here it gets even more interesting and much more complicated for the soldiers. Receiving the discharge certificate didn't mean the soldier could simply pack up and leave. Often, the discharge process dragged on for months due to a lack of funds in the treasury. Commanders deliberately dragged their feet to keep experienced fighters in the field a little longer. Imagine your boss refusing to let you go until you finish one more annual report. Legionnaires hated these delays and sometimes staged incredibly violent mutinies. They persistently demanded their pay and the right to finally take off their heavy armor. Emperors had to intervene personally to calm the enraged men with weapons. No one wanted to mess with thousands of professional killers who hadn't been paid. This was the very problem that had changed the balance of power in Rome itself more than once. When the stubborn bureaucracy finally gave in, the soldier received his severance pay. Initially, this was simply a generous land grant in a recently conquered province. But over time, good unclaimed land became scarcer and scarcer. Therefore, Emperor Octavian Augustus introduced a fixed cash payment for all retiring veterans. He simply realized, quite brilliantly, that handing out money was safer than taking land away from farmers. This payment was called the militia bonus and was a truly enormous sum. In different eras, it ranged from 3,000 to 5,000 silver denarii. To give you an idea of the scale, that was the earnings of an ordinary laborer over 12 years of continuous work. Sounds like excellent startup capital for a new life of luxury, doesn't it? Any modern retiree would be very envious of such a golden parachute from the state. However, the Roman economy was always full of unpleasant and unpredictable surprises. Inflation could eat away at some of that money on the long journey home. Furthermore, the legionary had to pay for his own travel expenses to his new place of residence. Travel in antiquity was insanely expensive and incredibly dangerous due to bandits. By the time he arrived at his destination, often only pitiful crumbs remained of his vast wealth. Nevertheless, for many, this was their only chance to escape total poverty. Young men from poor villages left for the army as ragged paupers and returned as respected wealthy men. They bought beautiful and expensive clothes and tried to pass themselves off as aristocrats. The locals looked at them with a mixture of animal fear and undisguised envy. And to be honest, this fear of veterans was always quite justified. Ahead of our veteran lay the most difficult stage of his earthly existence. He was about to transform from a cog in the war machine into an ordinary civilian. And this transition turned out to be far more painful than a forced march with a full pack. Surviving a battle against the Celts is a difficult and bloody business. But surviving in peaceful Roman society is a completely different, more subtle art. They were not Roman citizens and were considered second-class, if not third-class citizens. But the army gave them a unique chance to rectify this glaring social injustice. The rules of this game were extremely simple and incredibly cruel at the same time. Serve 25 years, survive dozens of battles, and you would receive the coveted citizenship. For a modern person, a passport from another country is simply a matter of paperwork, money, and time. In antiquity, Roman citizenship was a golden key that opened absolutely every door. It granted the right to vote, enter into legal contracts, and avoid humiliating corporal punishment. A full Roman citizen could not be tortured or flogged without a trial. An ordinary provincial, however, could be thrown into prison simply on a bureaucrat's whim. That is why barbarians flocked to the Roman army, willingly risking their own lives. They wanted to become full-fledged members of the very empire that had once conquered their lands. This is a perfect historical example of how the system assimilated its former sworn enemies. And here lies the most remarkable legal nuance of that harsh era. Citizenship was granted not only to the surviving veteran himself, but also to his children. Thus, a single ordinary soldier could radically change the fate of his entire future lineage. His grandchildren could become wealthy merchants, respected lawyers, or even distinguished Roman senators. The state literally bought the loyalty of future generations at the cost of one specific person's blood. The process of obtaining these rights was recorded in that very famous bronze diploma. The veteran returned to his native barbarian village as a local, untouchable hero. He donned a white toga, which only full-fledged Romans had the legal right to wear. His neighbors looked upon him with incredible respect and undisguised reverence. He was living proof that Rome's system of social mobility truly worked. But here a perfectly natural and logical question arises for the modern person. Why did proud Rome so generously grant its exclusive rights to former foreigners? Because the vast empire desperately needed loyal people on its farthest frontiers. A veteran with citizenship instantly became a bastion of Roman culture in the wildlands. He built a house in the Roman style, spoke Latin, and worshipped the Roman gods. The locals looked at him and wanted to live exactly the same way. They saw that serving Rome brought real rewards, not just wounds and death. As a result, the process of Romanizing the provinces proceeded at an incredibly rapid and effective pace. Modern politicians call this soft power and thoughtful cultural expansion. The Romans simply gave people citizenship in exchange for 25 years of slave labor. However, this legal status also created a host of dangerous everyday problems. Local leaders often hated returning veterans for their arrogance and new privileges. A veteran could refuse to pay local taxes, brazenly citing his status as a citizen. This sparked fierce conflicts that sometimes ended in mass brawls. Being part of the village elite turned out to be just as dangerous as standing on the front lines of the legion. Many auxiliaries preferred not to return to their wild hometowns at all. They settled near their former military camps, where everyone was absolutely equal. There they opened taverns, smithies, or became loan sharks for new, naive recruits. The military camp was gradually surrounded by a civilian settlement, which over time grew into a major city. Many modern European cities, such as Vienna or Cologne, grew out of precisely such settlements. Ultimately, this ingenious system transformed the demographic landscape of all of ancient Europe. Rome ceased to be merely a city for the elite and became a global idea. Yesterday's barbarians became the most ardent and loyal defenders of Roman values and laws. They took far greater pride in their status than those born in Rome itself, and this was the greatest unseen achievement of the Roman state apparatus. Civilian life seemed unbearably boring, unfair, and incredibly complicated to them. In the army, everything was crystal clear. There was an order, there was an enemy, there were comrades. Such returning veterans were called Evocati, which translated to recalled. They enjoyed immense and unquestioned respect among both the rank and file and the senior officers. Their status was something between a senior warrant officer and an elite special forces soldier. They no longer dug trenches or stood night watch in the freezing rain. They were saved for the most critical and bloody moments of the upcoming decisive battle. The state paid the evocators several times more than ordinary legionnaires. They received the best rations, comfortable tents, and the right to wear special insignia. Their sole task was to pass on their experience to the young and maintain discipline at critical moments. When the recruits began to panic at the sight of the screaming Celtic horde, the evocates simply stood there and grinned. Their icy calm had a greater effect on the rest of the army than any motivational speech from the commanders. Commanders often spent a great deal of time personally persuading their old veterans to return to the ranks. Julius Caesar assembled entire units from such men who knew no fear at all. They loved war, they understood war, and they didn't want to do anything else. To them, the sound of the battle horn was more pleasing than any urban civilian music. You could call it an addiction to adrenaline long before the scientific discovery of adrenaline itself. In addition, Evocati often served as modern-day military engineers and instructors. They knew how to build an impregnable camp or a siege tower from whatever materials were at hand. Young, ambitious centurions often consulted these gray-haired veterans before making difficult decisions. In essence, the entire invisible infrastructure of the Roman military machine rested on their strong shoulders. Without their experience, the mighty legions would have turned into nothing more than a mob of armed men. Returning to the army also solved the main psychological problem for the old veterans. They no longer had to try to fit into a peaceful society that was foreign to them. In the camp, they were surrounded by equally tough men with similar psychological traumas. They spoke the same slang, laughed at the same jokes, and understood each other without words. It was the largest and most successful psychological support group in the ancient world. Veterans were also entitled to a huge share of the spoils of war after successful campaigns. While an ordinary soldier might receive a couple of silver coins, a veteran could take home a chest full of gold. Many of them amassed colossal fortunes by plundering conquered territories. They became richer than some Roman senators simply by doing what they did best. It was a bloody but incredibly profitable and effective ancient business. However, the end of most Evocates' lives was rarely peaceful and serene. They continued to fight until old age slowed their honed reflexes. And at that fateful moment, luck usually turned its back on them on the battlefield. They fell to the sword of a young barbarian simply because their arms were too tired to hold a heavy shield. But for most of them, this was a far more desirable death than wasting away in bed. The phenomenon of the Evocati proves one simple historical truth that remains relevant today. You can take a man out of war, but taking war out of a man is nearly impossible. The system created ideal soldiers, but it was completely incapable of returning them to normal life. Rome paid for security by turning its citizens into lifelong hostages of war. And this cynical bargain worked flawlessly for many hundreds of years. Instead of buying a plow, they invested their bonus money in more profitable and dangerous ventures. They became tough ancient businessmen, leveraging their military connections and ruthlessness. And here, their skills in intimidation and strategic planning proved to be just what was needed. The most popular business among former legionnaires was opening roadside taverns and inns. They built them right on the very roads they themselves had once paved with heavy stone. The tavern owner knew all the passing couriers, officers, and wealthy merchants in the area. In essence, these establishments became informal hubs for gathering information and local gossip. The modern hotel business looks like a mere innocent child's game compared to these dens. But here lies the real intrigue of this ancient crisis management strategy. Veterans' taverns often served as a reliable cover for illegal trade and smuggling across the empire's borders. Which customs officer would dare to inspect a wagon belonging to a former centurion of a renowned legion? The soldiers knew all the secret paths and loopholes in the border security system inside out. They turned the state's security into their own personal and highly profitable business venture. The second most common practice was usury, or lending money at exorbitant interest rates. Veterans had cash on hand, which ordinary peasants were always desperately short of. They lent money at astronomical interest rates, sometimes reaching a staggering 50% per year. If a debtor couldn't pay, bailiffs didn't come knocking with neat paperwork. An old legionnaire would show up with a club and simply take his house. This provoked immense and entirely justified hatred from the local civilian population. People saw the veterans not as heroic defenders, but as cruel parasites sucking the life out of them. Often, former soldiers had to hire guards from among other demobilized soldiers to protect their wealthy homes. Genuine mafia-like clans emerged, controlling entire districts in provincial Roman cities. Ironically, the very people called upon to uphold the law often became its chief violators. Another lucrative business involved large-scale supplies of provisions for the active army. Who knows better than an old soldier how much grain and leather an entire legion needs on a campaign? Veterans became shrewd contractors, buying goods from peasants for pennies and selling them to the army at triple the price. They easily bribed quartermasters with whom they had recently sat around the same campfire. This scheme of kickbacks and bribes worked just as flawlessly as modern corrupt tenders. The most ambitious and wealthy among them invested in logistics and maritime transport. They bought small merchant ships and transported olive oil or expensive wine to Rome. It was an incredibly risky business due to frequent storms and ruthless Mediterranean pirates. But a man who had survived the massacre in the Teutoburg forest was hardly going to be intimidated by a handful of ragged bandits. Their ships were often armed and protected no less effectively than regular military galleys. Thanks to these business schemes, a new powerful class of wealthy people was emerging. The children of these successful veteran businessmen were already receiving an excellent classical education from the best teachers. They studied rhetoric, philosophy, and Greek, preparing for a great political career. The grandson of a simple peasant who had shed blood in the mud could become a refined and sophisticated intellectual. This was the very essence of the great Roman dream in its purest form. However, it is worth noting that such successful entrepreneurs were an absolute minority. Most veterans drank away their bonuses too quickly or fell prey to swindlers. The ability to kill enemies in no way guarantees the ability to read the fine print in commercial contracts. Many returned to appalling poverty just a couple of years after their triumphant discharge. Capitalism in the ancient world was just as ruthless as the hordes of barbarian tribes. As a result, a veteran's economic fate depended entirely on his cunning and luck. The state gave them a powerful financial start, but taught them absolutely nothing about managing that money. This is very similar to modern athletes who go bankrupt a year after ending a brilliant career. The Roman system was perfect at creating soldiers, but terrible at creating citizens. And this problem remained unresolved until the very fall of the great empire. The story of Roman military retirees is not just a boring tale from dusty academic textbooks. It is an incredibly vivid mirror reflecting the problems of our own modern society. Over 2,000 years, humanity has invented smartphones and successfully sent people to the moon. But we have still not learned how to smoothly transition soldiers from war back to civilian life. And therein lies the saddest irony of all world military history. We saw how the state clumsily tried to buy off its defenders with money and land. We witnessed how these promises shattered against harsh reality and inevitable economic crises. The Roman system of honesta missio was conceived as the ideal reward for loyalty and bravery. But in practice, it became a trial that proved more difficult than any battle against enemies. Surviving in a world without orders turned out to be the most difficult task for a Roman legionary. The phenomenon of the Evocati vividly demonstrates that war changes the human psyche forever. People accustomed to adrenaline and military brotherhood simply could not become ordinary, boring farmers. They preferred to risk their lives every day rather than face civilian routine. This is a frightening but entirely logical consequence of the ruthless machine Rome created. Soldiers became eternal hostages to their own profession and their own strength. On the other hand, it was precisely these veterans who became the glue that held the vast empire together. They spread Roman culture, language, and harsh laws to the remotest corners of Europe. They built taverns, married local women, and raised new citizens of Rome. Without their unseen, peaceful work, the empire would have fallen apart much more quickly. They turned out to be the best diplomats, simply because it was physically impossible to oppose them. Legal maneuvers involving marriages and citizenship also left a huge mark on world history. Rome showed the whole world how bureaucracy could be used to assimilate entire peoples. The issuance of bronze diplomas was a brilliant marketing move by the ancient government. These tablets cost a pittance, but people gave up a quarter of a century of their lives for them. Truly, the most profitable deal in the history of public administration of all time. The medical aspect of the issue inspires nothing but deep respect for the strength of the human spirit. Veterans continued to live and work with injuries that today are considered severe disabilities. They did not demand sympathy, but simply gritted their teeth and carried on with their work. Their endurance became a legend that outlived the empire itself by many centuries. It was a completely different level of human resilience, one that is very difficult for us to comprehend today. The financial successes and failures of former soldiers brilliantly illustrate the very essence of the ancient economy. From racketeering to international trade, they tried everything to survive in civilian life. And while many lost everything, some managed to found powerful and incredibly wealthy dynasties. The Roman army truly functioned as the most powerful social ladder of its harsh era. It was a dirty and bloody path to the top,